I don't have slides. Hi, my name is Jason Levine. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Auto Safety. And I want to start with some thank yous, particularly to Marianne and Lois for putting this together. And I saw John from the Truck Safety Coalition back there. This is an issue that's been around, depending on how you frame it, although the patent now at least goes back to 1913. The NHTSA's had regs on the books even before it was NHTSA in the 50s. And I certainly know there have been folks working on this since the 80s. I want to thank Senator Gillibrand and her staff for putting this together, and all the other members, staff who have joined us today. I know I saw Peter Kurdock back there somewhere from Advocates. I know they've been working on this too. So I think what this speaks to is sort of how wide-ranging, and some other folks have been working on this for a lot longer than I have personally, where the center really has been involved in this. I've been working on this for a long time because this is an issue that, for some reason, continues to not see a tremendous amount of progress on a day-to-day basis despite the advancement of technology. And so a little bit about what the Center for Auto Safety is, I think, will help explain why we've become interested in trying to spread the word about this. We were founded in 1970 by Ralph Nader and Consumers Union. We've been an independent voice for consumer safety, auto safety, quality, and fuel economy since then. And we push for lemon laws in every state, airbags in every vehicle, free recall repairs. And one of the things we've consistently done is where we see safety technology available, push for it as a standard as opposed to a luxury. So think about current topics that you might be familiar with. Automatic emergency braking is something that is currently available in some luxury models. There's been a voluntary agreement that will be available on all new cars starting in 2022. We'd like to see that as mandatory today, not in 2022. Or rear seat belts. We have them in cars. We don't have warnings on them. There's a law actually on the books that says they have to be required in all new cars. Another safety device, that's actually a warning. It's not even a new device. It's a device that already exists that we like to see. So, which brings us to Underride. There's a lot of interesting technical issues, as Malcolm was just talking about, and I know others will discuss. When we talk about safety in trucking, but with Underride, there's not really a lot of question as to are there solutions available to the problem. The main thrust of objections to the solutions proposed have been around cost and benefits, which is what Marianne and Lois asked me to talk about today. And I'll note that there's also an interesting solution or situation from a regulatory perspective because there is a retrofit solution. Often when we're talking about safety devices, you're generally just talking prospectively. What can we put on new vehicles, new products? In this instance, there actually is a retrofit available, which makes it a slightly unusual circumstance. So let's talk about cost benefits. Now, generally, when we talk about cost benefits in a regulatory construct and a safety perspective, the purpose, right, is to make sure that the cost to provide whatever the benefit is, and in this case, it's not dying or being critically injured underneath a truck, doesn't outweigh the cost of so doing. And this instance would be putting trucks out of business, for example, which would certainly cripple the economy, right? So that's sort of the balance that is intended to be struck. So, as you may have seen this week, new traffic crash fatality data came out for 2016. Numbers are again on the rise. We're at over 37,000 traffic-related deaths last year. That's a rise of 5.6% from the previous year, which is also an increase of 2.6% per vehicle mile traveled, up from 1.15 in 2015 to 1.18 in 2016. The last time NHTSA looked at the societal cost of traffic deaths, injuries, and property damage, it was in 2010, and that was $836 billion. That's in 2010, and in 2016 there were 10% more deaths than in 2010. So we're probably approaching $1 trillion, somewhere in that range. We talk about large trucks. In 2016, there were 4,317 deaths involving large trucks. Again, that's an increase from the previous year. 72% of those were non-truck vehicles. Generally speaking, that's pickup trucks or light vehicle or cars. We don't have the new estimated injury numbers yet, but in 2015 it was 116,000. I figure it's around the same number, if not more. So what about Underride specifically? Well, this is where it gets a little bit trickier. The data and the details on how to collect that data are under some dispute. As you'll hear about when people talk about Underride, sometimes they're talking about rear Underride, side Underride, front Underride, or all three at the same time. When you look at data associated with Underride, it's important to sort of know which category is being discussed. Sometimes it's all of them, sometimes it's just one or the other. But some estimates have put 20% of those killed when a passenger vehicle strikes a large truck. It's happening because they're colliding with the side of a truck. Others, as the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute did a study, that over a 2-year period, 75% of rear-end crashes where the striking vehicle was a light vehicle got to about 250 fatalities a year. NHTSA's National Center for Statistics and Analysis noted 218 Underride fatalities in 2014, but didn't specify location, side, rear, or front. And that also raises how accurate are these numbers. There's a lot of studies out there that suggest Underride fatalities are severely undercounted. I found one that said they were undercounted by a factor of 6, others a factor of 3.7. Someone went and reviewed 29 different states' police accident reports, found an undercount of about 3.1. And that same study figured about 200 annual deaths from side impact crashes. So I think so when we talk about the death statistics, they are in the hundreds, and there's some dispute around exactly how many hundreds. Two important things to remember there. One, we're not talking about catastrophic injuries, paraplegic, quadriplegic, or even when people do walk away, sometimes it's after 5, 10, 20 surgeries. And then also, as so aptly described much better than I ever will by Marianne and Lois, these are not just numbers, whether it's one or hundreds, these are real people. And they're personal stories, and that's why we're here. We're here because of people, and how do we address what we can with safety technology that exists in a way that doesn't break the bank, so to speak. So, which gets us to rulemaking, and sort of how, when we enter a regulatory process, and while there's legislation that is being discussed, I think it's helpful to look at the record that exists. And so NHTSA in 2015 put out a rule on rear side guards, and found, based on its study, that only 1.1 lives would be saved by the rear underguards that they were looking at the time based on the data collected. Now, how did they get to 1.1 out of somewhere between 200 and 600 potential deaths out there, depending on how you count them? Well, they reasoned out of the hundreds of deaths every year, not all of them would be prevented. A car was going too fast, so yeah, everyone needs to slow down. No disagreements there. Occupants weren't wearing their seatbelts. Everyone needs to wear their seatbelts, front and back. The occupants were too old. I haven't figured out how to fix that one yet. And then the cost. When they looked at, and I'll get to the retrofit in a second. So I think it's important when we have these conversations to make sure that there is a recognition that when we talk about safety, there is costs that are being added. But it's sort of at what is the balance? What is the net gain to society? What is the net gain overall throughout the system that we're talking about? And I'm also a firm believer, as Malcolm was talking about, American ingenuity comes up with solutions all the time to problems when pushed to do so, and makes things cheaper and better on a constant and regular basis, particularly when whole industries are engaged in it, and when there's a regulatory structure or incentive to do so. So as I said, somewhere between 200 and 600 rear, side, and front fatalities every year. Maybe that number might be a little bit low, maybe it's a little high. NHTSA, despite saying only 1.1 person would be saved in their rear underguard rule, NPR, said that it would still be a net benefit of just under $1 million. So again, if one life were saved, it was going to be a net benefit of just under $1 million. Now they did say if the retrofit went in, it would be a cost of approximately $400 million over the life of all of the trucks on the road today. Again, that's still only just saving that one life. But what if the numbers are just a little bit wrong? What if we save 10 lives a year? Not hundreds, not all of them, just 10. Well, regulatory, the value of statistical life is just over $9 million a year. So by year 5, you'd be saving $450 million. You've now covered the retrofit costs. And remember, that's not counting a single injury prevented or mitigated. So forget about the rules for a second. What about product liability? Lawsuits in this space can go anywhere from $1 million. There was one for $36 million. That's a real risk that businesses are carrying with them. And then there's the moral liability. You know, if you're driving a rig, that's something that's not going to walk with you. That's not something that's just going to go away. And especially when there's life-saving technology that exists, it seems like the tie, even if it's exactly even, should go to life. And it seems to me that the balance tips in favor of the benefit. Thank you.